Hey everyone, Nick Juskewycz with Daily Fantasy Winners and another episode of Tee to Green. And I'm here to answer a question for a lot of people that have been asking me about PGA algorithms. Hey, I'm trying to, refigure out what I can do for an algorithm that's going to give me some kind of a fantasy points per dollar projection each week. And I'm here to say that I don't think that that is the correct solution for you, and basically that I don't think a PGA DFS algorithm really works or is even that helpful. And there are three main reasons why. The first main reason is you are playing a different golf course every single week. Unlike in other daily fantasy sports where they're team sports and you're playing where it's like basketball and football. Yes, you're playing different arena or different stadium each and every week, but you're still playing on the same 100 or 120-yard field in football. You're still playing on the same size court in basketball. The only slight exception to this really is baseball when the visiting team goes to a home team's ballpark or a different team's ballpark, and because you're a home run hitter and maybe the wall is shorter in left field, so to speak, and you're more likely to hit a home run than based on the pitching matchup. Yes, there's some exceptions there, but for the most part, golf in terms of an algorithm, that is going to be a huge thing when it comes to you're playing a different golf course every week. And so because of this, you would not only need to change your algorithm each week in terms of what you're considering because you're playing on a different golf course, you would also need to change the weights of those variables as well. And so that makes it extremely complex to figure out what exactly would be accurate. Now, let's say you were able to do that. On top of this, the conditions of this golf course change from year to year. Sometimes they're relatively the same, and because the PGA Tour schedule is usually pretty much roughly the same every year. They're played at the same time of year. But the conditions often change still, can change drastically sometimes. Let's take the Masters, for example. Last year, Jordan Spieth at the Masters in 2015, he absolutely obliterated the field. One of the main reasons why is there was a lot of humidity in the air, and there was some rain leading up to the golf tournament, basically softened the greens. But because of the humidity, it kept the greens soft throughout the tournament. And as we know, Jordan Spieth is one of the best iron and wedge players on tour. And of course, he's one of the best putters on tour, of course, as well. And so his proximity to the hole was absolutely tremendous in terms of his ball striking. And then, of course, he made a lot of putts, hence why he basically blew out the field. I take a look at 2007 when Zach Johnson won. Now, Zach isn't necessarily the longest hitter either, kind of like Jordan, not the same exact thing, but Zach's a little bit more of a shorter hitter. The difference is the conditions here were really cold. It was one of the coldest Masters tournaments ever. On Saturday, it was also extremely windy, and there were a lot of rounds being shot in the 80s. And so the Masters in Augusta National is usually a golf tournament where everybody is playing very aggressively, going for the par 5s and 2, because driving accuracy really isn't that big of a deal at Augusta. But what Zach did is, instead of going for all these par 5s and 2, he was simply just hitting a typical 275, 280 drive. He would lay up with a long to mid iron to about 80, 100 yards out, and then he'd hit a little 3/4 full wedge to about 5-6 feet below the hole and make his birdie putt on the par 5s. And he was basically playing his style of game with his great short game. And because all these other guys, while they're bombing drivers and they're trying to hit utility clubs and long irons into these greens, they're landing on the green, but the course is so windy, cold, and dry also that they couldn't control the spin. They couldn't get the ball to stick at all, and the ball was rolling all over the greens on them, because remember, Augusta's greens are extremely complex and multi-tiered. And so Zach's game fit perfectly for the Masters in 2007, whereas in other years it may not be as, not say Zach couldn't play well in other Masters, because he has played well in other Masters before, but in this particular instance, his game particularly stood out in that '07 Masters. So that's where if you were trying to put together some kind of an algorithm, you would need to change the variables, and the weights of those variables for the one for 2007 should be a lot different than the one for 2015. So that's point number one. Number two, golf is an individual sport, and unlike pretty much all other daily fantasy sports, not all other daily fantasy sports, but most others, they are team sports. So in golf, players can often be going through a lot of changes, whether it's new equipment, new grip, a new swing coach, hired a new caddy, maybe they're just trying a new technique or just a new strategy. Maybe there's changes in someone's personal life. Maybe they're battling an injury. Now, you might be saying, okay, well, wait a minute. Basketball players, alter or fix their shots all the time. Or a football player might be trying out new gloves or something like that. I don't know, just whatever. They're just battling a simple injury. What's the difference here? The difference is an individual is responsible for everything that happens in his or her performance. They must be there's nobody there to pick them up, unlike in a team sport where you're dealing often with team projections and algorithms that we would use. There's nobody there to pick you up in a good team projection, a good matchup. So it's a lot easier for your performance to stay relatively close to the mean when you've got a couple of these issues flaring up, as opposed to an individual sport when you're 100% responsible for everything that you do. And especially with a scoring system like DraftKings, where you need to be playing all 72 holes of golf, make the cut, of course, and then, of course, all the scoring that goes with in terms of birdies and eagles. And keep it in mind also, 72 holes is a pretty big sample size, and dealing with 4 days of action when you're walking out there for like 5 to 6 hours per round, there is a ton of downtime, and it's just with that much time you are out on the golf course, in terms of these little things flaring up, they can become a lot more of a factor if you're just simply not in a good place, whether it's you're not getting comfortable with a certain element of your game, maybe something's bugging you and you've got family issues, I don't know, it could be just anything whatsoever. And so it's a lot easier for those in an individual sport when you're dealing with, again, like I said, 4 days, 5 to 6 hour rounds. It's a lot easier for that in an individual sport than in a team sport where you're just playing a 2.5 hour sporting event, when you're only in there some of the game anyways, and you're only playing a specific position. The third reason also is there is a lot of variance in golf, quite frankly, in comparison to other sports. Good and bad bounces happen out there. Sometimes a player they think they hit the perfect drive, and their ball takes a bad bounce on the side hill on a weird slope of the fairway, and they end up in the water hazard. Maybe sometimes they've hit the perfect iron shot, and it catches a firm part of a downslope in the green, and then it rolls over into the bunker, and they're completely short-sighted and have a very minimal chance just of making par when they think they're going to have a great chance at birdie. Good and bad lies happen. We see players hit the fairway all the time, but their ball happens to roll in a bit of a divot. The rough can bring a lot of variance in terms of what you have as an option hitting the ball out of there, especially at the tougher tournaments. The last thing, and this is probably the biggest thing more than anything, is there's a lot of variance in putting. There really is. You'll hear players talk about this all the time in terms of maybe like they shoot 70 on Thursday and Friday, but then they shoot 65 on Saturday, and they'll get asked in an interview, hey, so what was the key out there in your big improvement today? And they'll just come out honestly and say, I played about the exact same. I just happened to make a few putts. I hit good putts on Thursday and Friday. They just didn't happen to go in, and today they did. And that is a lot of the time, because when you're having these 10, 12 foot putts out there, a lot of the times you think you've made them, and it's just the tiniest bit of a misread. You got a little bit unlucky with a couple lip outs, or it just hits a bad little break in the green, or a bad little bounce, and you get an unfriendly roll. It happens all the time in golf. And so to get any kind of a consistency, and so to wrap all this up into those 3 points, just in terms of all those things of variance and unpredictability and weird factors coming into play, and being an individual sport, I just do not think you are going to get a consistent enough of result, or of a winning result, if you will, just off a projection. I do think it could help you a little bit in terms of giving you kind of a rough outline, or a certain kind of a guiding tool. And for whatever it's worth, I am not saying that it is impossible to come up with a PGA DFS algorithm. I think a lot more of the daily fantasy golf is still tremendously growing, and we're getting a lot more better stats out there in terms of what I've seen. But for all intents and purposes, for everything I have seen in terms of some people wanting to try and find just one PGA DFS algorithm that's going to basically solve them, that they can just plug in and use and not really follow or know a lot about golf, I think you're just looking for a shortcut that simply isn't there. You definitely can become a winner at Daily Fantasy PGA. It is 100% possible. The biggest thing I am saying is, though, you need to put in the time, the work, and the energy into knowing the golfers, and probably the most underrated aspect is knowing the golf courses as well. And so, again, I definitely strongly encourage you to do that, because a lot of people, the average Daily Fantasy player in PGA, as I would say, has a lower level of skill in comparison to a lot of other sports like baseball, whereas a lot more people are using algorithms and catching on. And so, in any case, hopefully you do put in the time and the work, and you're enjoying these videos. And if you do, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube and Twitch pages. And then, of course, as well, you can follow me at Nick Juskewycz, and follow Daily Fantasy Winners at DFantasyWinners for DailyFantasyWinners.com. All right, thanks, everyone.